last time we were talking about reclaiming spirituality. I feel like some of you probably weren't here for that conversation. But a couple of you were. Gonna do a quick recap of what we talked about. Do you remember? Were you awake? Oh, you're getting so flustered. Look, your glasses are all fogged up. It's not that serious. Don't worry. So essentially, we were looking at how do we, if we're talking about reclaiming spirituality, that assumes that something has taken the spirituality to begin with, right? If you're trying to take it back, what was it that took it from you to start off with? Does that make sense? So maybe just as like a quick recap, because we have different voices in the room right now, we can kind of start from there as well. If you were to try to verbalize for yourself, what is it that's kind of taking your spirituality from you? That was kind of one frame. And we spent a bunch of time talking about also what does spirituality mean? So that we could deconstruct not just the terms unnecessarily, but for us to have like a language so that we know kind of where it is that we land. Do you guys remember what we talked about when we said what spirituality is? What did we talk about?
We have to speak.
Yeah, it's fine. Holly can't even see. So, yeah, it's either you or her.
They're like the layers of the soul.
Okay, yeah. So we talked about the soul. What else did we talk about? What were you gonna say?
Me? Like our faith in relation to Allah.
Great. Anything else? When we talk about spirituality, what does it mean? Like if we were to give it a definition. Okay, so why don't we do this? Now more people are trickling in. Huh?
Community.
Community? Okay. There's not a wrong answer here. Maybe if you kind of turn to the person next to you and just engage. If you don't want to talk to the person next to you, talk to the person behind you. But what does this word mean, spirituality, when we're talking about it? So if you spend a couple of minutes, you just talk pairs or maybe in a group of three, and we'll come back and kind of discuss, what do we mean when we talk about spirituality? You guys can also jump in to the group over here if you want to. Oh yeah, okay.
Everything sort of. Oh, I like that. Yeah. Yeah, the layers of the heart. Yeah. Yeah. And physical. Yeah. Top down. The mind, the heart. Yeah. Well, how did that go? Because yeah.
Okay, so what do we come up with? We're talking about spirituality. What are we saying it is? Like, what does this word mean, spirituality? Yeah.
You said like a belief of like a higher power, not necessarily like a higher being. Because like I know there are a lot of people like spiritual and other people believe God.
Okay. A belief in a higher power. Other things. Yeah.
Spirituality is not something within yourself. You're growing and enhancing this belief within yourself instead of like religion is just something like on the outside and something you're spreading.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Inner peace. Great. So I want to build off of what you were saying because I think it's important, right? In the prism of modernity, you have this notion that religion is something that's very separate from spirituality. But in Islam, there's not a separation, right? There's a synergetic relationship between the two that has to be recognized because you can't essentially have one at a deeper level without having the other. So if you have just prayer, you have prostration, you have bowing, you have kneeling, you have standing, and you go through the physicality of it, it necessitates also having, for depth and increase, a presence of like your heart, right? So if I'm prostrating on the ground, we pray Isha in 30, 40 minutes, inshallah, but my heart is not prostrating. My heart is somewhere else, or my mind is not prostrating. My mind is somewhere else. It's a problem because I have what's there in terms of practice and the external, but I'm missing that inner component, right? And within our tradition, we have an idea that in the prism of modernity, this is something that's going to kind of diminish, so to speak, the ability to have kind of depth of perspective, right? There's a character in our tradition that's called Dajjal. May Allah protect us from this fitna. Do people know who Dajjal is? Who's Dajjal? No, you have.
Yeah, but he freaks me out, so I really don't want to mention it.
You just, why don't you show people the Mickey Mouse you just drew? Huh?
I don't want to know.
Riham just drew a picture of Mickey Mouse that essentially looked like he was, it looked like he was out of Michael Jackson's Thriller video. There's never been a picture of Mickey Mouse like that ever. Who's Dajjal as a character? What is he? Yeah.
I could be wrong, but is he not like Antichrist?
He's an Antichrist figure. Yeah. What do we know about him? He comes at the end of the world. Great. Huh? He's bad, not good. Yeah. Like the Prophet ﷺ used to make particular dua against the fitna of Dajjal. Right? There's a dua the Prophet would make. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr ومن عذاب جهنم ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن فتنة المسيح الدجال. That, oh Allah, I seek your refuge from the punishment of the fire and the torment of the grave and the trials of life and death and the difficulty, the tribulation of Dajjal. How is Dajjal described? Yeah.
One eye.
It's one eye, right? We have a chapter in the Quran, Surah Balad, that's in the end of the Quran, the last juz, where there's a verse that says, Alam naj'al lahu aynayn, that did we not make him with two eyes, right? Like you and I have two eyes, but Dajjal as a figure is said to have one eye. And as you said, he comes at the end of time. There's an entire apocalyptic genre of hadith and eschatological like literature in our tradition, end of times things. And so Dajjal, within that framework of what is at the end of time, is this one-eyed being that literally has one eye on his face. But in a more esoteric sense, when we look at verses like the verse from Surah Al-Balad that says that you were made with two eyes, the idea is that with modernity, as we get closer to the end of time, people's vision is going to become limited. That we are meant to be people who can see outwardly and inwardly. And Dajjal as a being at the end of time, people are going to lose now depth of perspective because they're only going to be able to see in one direction, either outward or inward. But we're meant to be people who see both. Does that make sense? And so the ability now to combine religion and spirituality is not something that is fundamentally antithetical to Islam. It's actually quite necessary within Islam. What gets in the way? What makes that difficult? Life? What about life?
Work, school.
Okay, work gets in the way, school gets in the way. You're gonna say something?
Hardships.
Hardships? Like what?
Related to faith and belief, people you're surrounded
Okay. And you want to specify, we want to, and if we keep things generic, you want to utilize language that you use, right? And you might use the word hardships, when I go home and my kids ask me, how was my day? Or I ask them, they usually don't say, I had many hardships today. Do you know what I mean? But it already now makes the conversation at a distance because I'm using someone else's words, where I'm engaged now in a discourse that isn't going to resonate with my heart, right? We would make dua, for example, you pray to God, you make supplication. One of the etiquettes is you use language that you know, right? You speak English well, make dua in English. You speak Spanish well, make it in Spanish. Whatever language you speak well, because you're gonna have more presence in words that you have familiarity with. You see what I mean? And so when you talk about religion, you talk about spirituality, you don't want to talk about it in a prism of language that is the language you're supposed to be using, but things that can allow for you to be transformative within yourself. And so you have a relationship to the words that you use in common discourse, or you learn more words, but you're still kind of connecting to them. What else gets in the way? Do you believe in your practice of faith, Islam as an actual faith system, as a way of life? Do you believe the way that you engage it sees a synergy between religion and spirituality? If we were to assume for this conversation that by religion we mean that which is outward, and by spirituality we mean that which is inward. Does that make sense? Do you feel like that's the way it was given to you? Do you feel like that's the way you kind of see it today? Does the question make sense? What do you think? Yeah.
I think today there's more of a difference. I mean, there's more of a separation between religion and spirituality, where a lot of people consider religion to be something to follow, whereas spirituality is something.
Okay. I'm saying like let's assume that Islam, let's talk about it from the perspective of Islam, and let's talk about it as people who have some type of relationship to Islam, right? Not knowing where people are in their religiosity, not knowing if everybody is Muslim or not, but we're sitting in an Islamic Center's prayer room. In your exposure to Islam as a religion, do you feel, in your opinion, that the Islam that you know is one that brings synergies to what is external and what is internal? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Grow up and you come to Islam on your own, it becomes more of something that you know. Yeah. It gets it, but as I'm growing up, I
Okay, great. What about anyone else?
Yeah, for me, like while growing up, it was like same as like set of rules you need to follow, but then they didn't teach us like what one action means, why do we do it and stuff. So when you started reading about it and you see like the translations of the surahs itself, when you do it that way, it connects more and you know why this deed was done. And suppose one ayah came, why did it come, when the events leading to it. So you put things into perspective and context like after that.
Anything else? Yeah.
I think for me, I also see value in the like the setup for the office, even if like every goes through like highs and lows, and when you're going through a little, it's important to just like keep that routine, because then it's gonna keep you in shape for like developing that spirituality.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is not that every single time you pray or fast, you're going to have a spiritually intoxicating experience, right? That's just not going to be possible. Do you know what I mean? Right? You know, Allah grant us hearts that are alive and filled with energy, but like you get tired and it's tough and it's hard. There's literally hadith that talk about the Prophet says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that like people are going to pray and it's only going to be like a portion of their prayer that has presence to it. You know, there's going to be a part of it and a fraction of it, not in its entirety. And he's talking at a time where the people who are around him are considered to be the best generation of Muslims. You know, and so as we move forward, it's not that religion gets diluted, but you're moving away now from what is kind of the initial phase of it. Things are going to now get impacted and they're going to manifest in different ways, right? In order for us to think out this question of reclaiming spirituality, it's not just always that work gets in the way, supremacy gets in the way, capitalism gets in the way, patriarchy gets in the way, but we have subjective journeys that we undertake. And where and how we're able to now think about, well, what's removing from me? That it's amazing that as I grow older, I can move forward and opt to read a little bit more or deepen in a little bit more. But what if I didn't have that as an option? Or what if nobody told me that I could do that? Because I could put you in front of 10 people right now who, whenever they asked a question, they were told, we don't ask questions. And they just learned that it's not my place to speak on topics of faith. Or when there was curiosity was squashed, and it made them feel as if that my relationship with the divine is one that has to be understood fundamentally as someplace where I'm not necessarily entitled to it. It's not supposed to give me a sense of empowerment, so to speak. You know what I mean? How do you start to overcome some of that? Because it can yield now a lot of different challenges. Because on the other end of it, you have people who feel like this inward sense of connection to everything that faith claims to offer. That my dua is transformative, my prayer is transformative. My relationship with God gives me a strength. It doesn't mean I don't get sad or I don't cry when I lose a loved one or relationships don't work out or this is tough or that's tough, but I still find meaning in things. But if I'm not experiencing that, I can very easily now open a door for self-deprecation. There must be something wrong with me. God does not like me. Look, everybody else is doing great and I'm just doing terrible. How does one start to overcome this? What's like a mechanism through which I can begin to now relate my inward to my outward? Does the question make sense? How do you start to do that? And some of the ways principally that we can understand some of this is by identifying also what is like not something to do, you know? But where would you start? Somebody walks in here and they say, I feel like my inside is just dead. I feel as if like nothing is working for me. I don't even know why I should be doing X, Y, or Z things anymore. What would we say to them? How would we approach that conversation with them? You get what I'm saying? Yeah.
Are we answering it or are you just like?
Yeah, answer. Go ahead.
Okay, I'd say like one of the first steps is really just to shut the feet or like kind of validate a lot of the struggles that they're feeling in words instead of just jumping to, oh yeah, go pray and do this and you'll be good, or just look on the right side, but like really just like letting them know, like, I understand what you're feeling and like I'm so sorry you're feeling that way. Working slowly. Definitely validate the struggles first.
Amazing. And then what? What if I don't have someone to talk to? So you are now giving advice to a person who's sitting in the middle of nowhere and they don't have a name, but they exist. And they're hearing potentially beyond the scope of empathy a set of steps to help them reclaim their spirituality, reclaim essentially a relationship back to their heart, to their soul, to their spirit. How do we get somebody to break out of a mold where they're on this kind of downward spiral, so to speak? Right? Because spiritual ascension is a hard thing to do. The likeness to physical exercise is the same as spiritual exercise. If you go up a mountain, it's very hard to go up the mountain. When you're going down the mountain, it's much easier. And that's the same. Your spiritual increase is going to require a different kind of exertion. But once you start to spiral downward, it feels like you just get faster and faster. It's much easy to just go down as opposed to go up. How do you get somebody, or how can how do I start to get myself back up? How do I start to move back in that direction? Yeah.
Well, I feel like one of the things that I've seen people do, or that I've sat and done with people, is sort of switch the narrative. So in that sense, like, say we're talking about somebody who's like self-deprecating in the way that they talk to themselves. Um, there are still things that they would like to believe about themselves. So for instance, if somebody thinks that I don't know, that they're ugly, like they would want to believe that they're attractive. And so like if you list some of the things that you wish you believe, like actually believe, then it sort of opens the door to like being able to actually see them written out. And then maybe if you read them every day or you looked at them or just put them into your head, that could be a step.
Okay. Yeah.
I think guilt is a big block. So I feel like when you're going through a hard period and it feels like nothing's going well, like you were saying, like that whole thought process, God doesn't love me. When you're trying to get back on that track where you feel connected to God, I think sometimes it can be a block where you're like, well, I already messed up. And then you're surrounded by obviously rhetoric that makes it seem like, it's about do's and don'ts rather than, forgiveness and mercy. So I think the first step would be trying to get over guilt and realizing you're more than just one mistake or mistakes or the times you've fallen. You're also about the times you've gotten back up and decided to still try to stay connected to your faith.
Yeah. It's easier said than done, right? Because every element societally is looking to benefit from us deepening in remorse and guilt, so that it gives us now a mechanism of complacency to move forward. When you can make religion devoid of spirituality, or you can turn spirituality into something that's just a different variation of egocentricity, that is what whiteness is built off of. It allows for a consumer-driven market to be able to capitalize off of your feelings of pain, your feelings of sadness, because it's going to tell you, hey, just go buy this thing. That's where happiness is. Go purchase this. That's where you'll find balance. Engage now in what it is that renders for you a short-term satisfaction, as opposed to something that allows for an inward sense of stability and contentment. So when we talked about an Islamic model of psychology towards the self, we talked about the aql, which is the intellect. We talked about the ruh, which is the soul. We talked about the nafs, which is the lower self. We talk about the badan, or the jasad, which is the body. And you talk about the qalb, which is the spiritual heart. In a worldly existence, this becomes the seat of everything, right? The soul within an Islamic paradigm is what comes into existence in an Adamic creation narrative within the world prior to this one. And as we move from this, we talked about this a little bit last time, so I won't go into it too much. You go from the place where all the souls are into individual journeys now. You're in the womb. That's where the soul enters into the fetus, the body. You then have an existence in this worldly plane, right? That's where we are right now. And so here, this is what has an opportunity to be sovereign over the self. And it's in a constant battle with what we call the nafs, which is also trying to maintain a sense of being sovereign over the self. The nafs, the lower self, the ego, is what a materialistic existence is constantly in pursuit of feeding. It doesn't want you to be generous. It doesn't want you to be forgiving. It doesn't want you to be charitable. It doesn't want you to be kind. It pursues complacency, short-term satisfaction at the place of contentment, long-term stability. And so much in our text talks about now the spiritual heart and the ability to render it through spiritual exercise, which is not just about, I'm going to sit and engage in the recitation of certain litanies and rosaries and all of these kinds of things, but to be able to actualize presence in everything that I do. So even my pursuit of my education is a spiritual experience. Even my pursuit of my relationships fundamentally are a spiritual experience because they're creating meaning for me. They're allowing for me to deepen in perspective, right? I'm not on that route that is Dajjalic in nature, that is one-eyed, and there's no depth to what's there. I'm in pursuit now of something that renders something more deeply. If I was to ask you individually, not in a judgmental way, I know some of you know me longer and a little bit more better than others. And some of you we've never had a conversation with before, and I'm sorry about that. I'm looking forward to get to know you all. I'm not trying to say it in a judgy way, right? I love each one of you. If I was to ask you, what's going on in your heart right now? Like, what would you say? You don't have to answer that. Don't answer that out loud. I once went to a retreat where there was a lot of well-known like Muslim figures speaking. This is when I was much younger. And I somehow got roped into from being an attendee to being like a volunteer. And I was driving people around who were speaking at things in my car. And there was somebody there who is a doctor, MD, but also homeopath, very much attuned to like inner self workings. And he was doing consultations for people. In our spiritual tradition, we have a lot of individuals that we recognize that their level of spirituality heavily attached to what they consume, their ability to speak truth, etc. It gives them capacity to now recognize certain things with people. And I never met a man like this in my life before. And I was probably younger than most of you, even at that time. And I looked at him and I said, tell me, like, what do you do? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, if I was to talk to you, like, how would you give me a consultation? Right. And then I said something stupid. I was like, yeah, dude, come on, doctor. Like, do me right now. Tell me how would you do that? He's a nice man. I'm wearing a thobe, and on top of that, a log cloak that's called a barnoose. It's a Moroccan kind of outer cloak. It's very thick. And just in looking at me standing up, he said, I can tell that you have injured your lower back before and that you have this problem with your left knee. And I said, oh, that's pretty interesting. And then he took like a closer look at me and he said to me, you know, and I can tell that you are looking for like deep friendship and companionship. I was like, what? And he kept talking and he started to like mention to me things that I like said to him, okay, why don't we just talk a little bit later? And he gave me an insight through his own intuition about parts in myself that were definitely there, but I wasn't necessarily recognizing. I was more so in denial of. He went to the extent that when I was dropping him back to his room, he said to me, you know, you should just find a nice girl. That'll be your solution. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then the next day, we're walking into the hall where he's going to speak. And there was a woman standing my age, like a young girl, like as far away as you are from me. And he points at her and he's like, she's really nice. Why don't you marry her? And she looked at me and I was like, I'm sorry he said that to you. I don't know. I know, please forgive me. But he was helping me to understand the importance of looking into your heart, something that I had not ever done before, and something that Allah had given him a unique capacity and gift to be able to do. But it became like very eye-opening for me, and not in a way where I would say that that was an epiphanatic moment, because the epiphany I had wasn't about, oh my God, religion is so real. But what became real to me was, I don't pay attention to my inner self. And some random man that I've never met before just opened a door to me about, he can likely tell me more about what's going on with my inside than I can. So if I was to ask you right now, what's going on in your spiritual heart? What do you give abode to within it? What is it holding on to? What does it love? Because that's what the heart's function is. It's to love. So what is it linked to? Because it doesn't have to love what's good for it. But to know the nature of it, the state that it's in, what role does it play? If you were to deepen the reflection and I was to say, how do you think it is right now in the battle that's going on within you, right? The word for like the prayer niche in Arabic is called a mihrab. If you ever gone into a masjid and you see like where the imam stands and there's this little nook, it's called the mihrab because it has the word harb in it, right? Harb in Arabic means war, battle. And the mihrab, where you stand when you pray, is derived from the same root, because when you go to stand to pray, there's a battle taking place inside of you for control of your thoughts, control of your heart, control of yourself. So if you reflect on, well, what's like sovereign within me right now? Is it desires that I have? Is it my lower self? Is it my heart? Am I in oscillation, which is fine, but what's really going on there? You see what I mean? Does that make sense? And to spend time in just thinking about not like direct answers to things, but in thinking about, well, what's coming up for me? So I don't have to jump to name it right away, but I can acknowledge that there's things that are there, and I start to now address it in a systematic way, because I'm just journeying to a point, and I don't have to get there tomorrow, but my ability to get there necessitates a sense of strategy nonetheless, right? The two questions that I ask people the most over the last 16 years of doing what I do professionally, that I get the answer of I don't know more often than anything is one, I ask them, what are your values? What like really guides your moral compass? Why do you choose the choices you choose? What are your decisions? What goes into it? And then I ask also, how do you take care of your heart? What are your outlets? And these two questions, what are your values? And how do you take care of your heart? When I sit with people and we engage in this, these two questions, almost always the answer I get when people are being honest and vulnerable is, I don't know. What's the relationship between the two questions? What are your values and how do you take care of your heart? Is there a relationship? Yeah.
Isn't it like if you're interacting with people, friends, family, you should have values that are aligned. You should align your values with, well, no, your values should align with people that you are surrounded by. And if you're not, then you should protect your heart from those people. Kind of, so in that sense, it kind of.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say your values are kind of like what you prioritize.
And what you
Prioritize has to also do with how to take care of yourself.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Your values are demonstrated through your choices, right? You know what's important to you based off of like what gets you upset. What do you spend most of your time doing? What do you pursue for the most part? What keeps you awake at night? All of these kinds of things. You can find a sense of what your actual values are, not what you ideal your values to be, but what your actual values are based off of your choices. Spirituality, if you want a metric of knowing where you're at spiritually, spirituality can also be measured based off of the decisions and choices that you make. If you don't know what this is, your values, you're going to get to a place where socialization that has a very particular and formulaic process of attaining success and identify success in a very rigid way is going to have you live in pursuit just of the satisfaction of this for your life in its entirety. It's going to tell you that like wealth is something that you need, right? That food is what you should always be thinking about. That sex is what the goal is. But you're not a cow. I'm not a cow. We're not animals in that sense. We have physical needs, but we also are in a space where there's more to us than just a body. There's all of this as well, right? So if you're not consciously identifying this, then the way that the care of your heart is also not going to become aligned into this categorically. You see what I'm saying? How do you take care of your heart? I think questions are so important within spiritual growth. Because if you stop being curious, you're going to become stagnant, right? My kids ask me like 500 questions a day. I watched this weekend with them, we watched Marvel's Infinity War, which we watched before. And then we started to watch Endgame, and I passed out in the middle of it. I don't know what happened. I woke up. My 6-year-old and my 8-year-old, they've watched these two movies before. Like, still, anytime something happens, right? Thanos comes on. Oh my God, what's he gonna do, Baba? Who's that guy? Why is that happening? So then I said, if you ask me questions, I'm going to start asking you questions. Why are you asking me so many questions? So they'd ask me a question, then I'd start asking them silly questions too. So I'd be like, why do these guys never go to the bathroom? And then my son is like, Bubba, they don't go to the bathroom. I said, why does Drax never wear a shirt? And Kareem's like, yeah, he's not wearing any clothes. And we just keep asking questions and questions and questions. I don't want my kids to ever stop asking questions. Because at some point, that's going to become now the roadblock for them deepening in their sense of knowing and understanding. Ours is a tradition that embraces a wisdom in being able to say, I don't know something. You don't ever want to be a person who has a thought, an opinion, or an idea on everything. That's a problem. In the same vein, the ability to say, I don't know, can now create a thirst to go out and know more. But if you've stopped asking questions and somebody has now taken that away from you, that's something you have to reclaim in order to reclaim your spirituality. You want to be able to ponder, you want to be able to reflect, you want to be able to think and have that curiosity. The same way you want to be able to have a certain strength and a certain belief in how it is that you're going to approach things. And so when you ask questions, they're not meant to be a mode of self-deprecation. You don't want to say, how do I take care of my heart? And then the immediate thought that comes after is, I'm so bad, I don't even know how to do this, and all of this kind of stuff. You are just giving Shaitan victory over you, right? Push him away and say, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm just trying to figure it out. That's all that God wants from us, is to try our best and to take steps. You are going to prioritize directly or indirectly what it is that you prioritize. And if you are not consciously choosing what's important to you, it doesn't mean that you still are not emphasizing something. And in the pursuit of the various parts that make you whole, which part do you feel like you are spending the most time on? And not even productively, but what element of you are you engaging most often in the course of your day, in the course of your week? You see what I mean? Yeah.
Kind of like what you said, how do you separate the values you'd like to have ideally with the values you actually have? Because that's something you said that.
What's a value that you'd like to have ideally?
Selflessness.
Great. So I want to have selflessness as something. Okay? If I was to create a recipe now to get to a space, to get to a goal, there's a bunch of different things that I can do in order to get here. One, you got to know what this is. What is this? Right? Because you can't pursue something if you don't know what it is. And with specificity. So if I say to you, bring me the chair, you can bring me that chair, you can bring me this chair, you can bring me that chair. They're all chairs. They function as a chair. All three of them are different. These are different colors. That allows for you to sit up off the ground. But the specificity of it is what's going to become important. So selflessness isn't like just this or just that, and ambiguity, but define it, give it a concrete meaning. You can ask yourself, in pursuit of this now, what does success look like for me? Like, how do I know? What are metrics of selflessness? And then third, where do I stand in relation to it? So if I want to get here and I'm over here, I can figure out a trajectory to get to my goal. But quite often for a lot of us, in terms of inward growth and even outward growth, the issue that we run into isn't that I don't know what my destination is, but I don't actually know where I stand in relation to it. So if I think I stand here and I want to get here, then it's like, okay, here's where I can go. But if I'm actually over here and I believe I'm here, and then I take out that path, I didn't get to where I wanted to be, not because I didn't know where I wanted to end up. I didn't know where I was beginning. You see what I'm saying? And then fourth, what gets in the way? What keeps this from happening? And that's going to be subjective. The application of a value is also hard when it's just now a noun in and of itself, right? So, like, truthfulness can be a value, being trustworthy. What that translates to on a specific level, if we were to define it concretely for us, it's got to be in something that creates now an ability to measure, meaning I don't want to lie. You see the difference in the two? Like being honest versus I'm not going to lie. There's a nuanced difference that's there, and allowing for us to think this out now in terms of the value in and of itself, you start to build a relationship to it. The vehicle through which one increases in something quite often is the thing itself when we're talking about a virtue or a value. So the way that you become more patient is simply by being patient, right? The way that one becomes more compassionate is by just being compassionate. The way you increase in kindness is by being kind. Does that make sense? And the upward trajectory is only yielded through implementation in that way, right? Some of you have heard me say, for example, my son Kareem, he turned 1 when we were in Malaysia for a speaking tour. That my wife and I had been invited to Malaysia and Singapore to give some talks, and Kareem turned 1 while we were in Singapore. And we were in a mall in Kuala Lumpur having lunch one day, and my wife Priya and our daughter Medina, they went to find something that was very healthy, and Kareem and I walked to find a fried chicken place. And this is what we did. And Kareem couldn't walk at that time. He's 1. If you've ever seen my son, I don't know how many of you actually met him. You're gonna love him. He's great. My daughter, even more amazing, mashallah. They're both beautiful, beautiful young children. And Kareem, when he was a baby, he was in like the highest percentile for head size. He had a big head. And not only did he have a big head, but you know, my man's butt was also very big. So he had this disproportionate size head to his body, and his rear end was very large. And he's waddling now, crawling on the mall floor, getting to this fried chicken place with me. And he gets to a point now where we're standing. There's a ramp that you have to go down to get to the entrance of the chicken place. Kareem and Medina, they are New York City kids, and he's only 1. And it's remarkable to see, subhanAllah, like how children learn things. And it can create opportunity for your own inward reflection, because it takes me back to like, wow, how did I land where I've landed? Like the first time my son saw the ocean, and I watched him just look at what the ocean is. It was crazy to just see him see this. So he doesn't know what a ramp is. We've never had a ramp in our house. He doesn't know it. He's turning 1 while we're there. He doesn't know what to do. So he looks at me and I just look back at him. So I'm a really bad dad. I didn't do anything. And so he turns around now and takes like himself really close to this ramp. It's not high. It's like fairly low. It's probably like from here down. He puts one of his feet onto it and then takes it off quickly. And then he puts that foot back and forth again a bunch of times.
until eventually he puts the second foot on. And he leaves it there and takes it off again and again. And eventually he does this until backwards he crawls down this ramp. And when he gets to the bottom of the ramp, he looks at me with a big smile on his face. And then he just goes up and down the ramp again and again. Because like he can do it. Why wouldn't he do it? And then we came onto a staircase. And without any hesitation, he now starts to climb up the stairs. At which point I grab him because I don't want him to slip and fall. But the only way that Kareem can get the courage to go down the ramp is by going down the ramp. Do you understand? And the courage that he gets from going down the ramp is one that is so unbounded that the next obstacle he sees in his way, he is comfortable in trying to take that on also. And that's sometimes how you have to approach the increase of your inward growth. So stillness isn't about, hey, I gotta like sit and be able to reflect for 3 hours and that's it. I gotta read Quran for a juz a day. No, like read a verse and then build yourself up to it. And if all you get to is reading 2 verses a day, that's amazing. Why are you hating on yourself? You understand? But to get to a space where you answer the question, I erased it, of what success looks like, only at these like grand scales. You want to be more selfless, right? What does that mean? And outline it for yourself. You want to engage in certain practice, build it on a trajectory that has a sense of, I'm working my way towards something. But if you're trying to take these big leaps, why wouldn't you get exhausted? And if there's no elements now of real kind of self-reflection on, well, how am I taking care of my inner self? What am I doing for it? You see what I mean? Okay, I want to be mindful of the time. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions before we close out for today? Comments? Yeah.
How do you know if you're taking care of it yourself? Because I feel like sometimes to relax, I'll spend time on entertainment, but then one episode goes to another episode, and I can't tell if I'm really relaxing or if I'm just procrastinating on my school.
Well, you learn about you through you. This is a paradox of the self, right? And there's Quranic verse that gives us this insight. You can only learn about yourself through yourself. Does that make sense so far? Right? You can't learn about you through me directly because I'm not you and you're not me. We have our own strengths and non-strengths. And so for me to recognize now about me, right? In Surah Al-Adiyat in the Quran, there's a verse that says, وَإِنَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ لَشَهِيدٌ, and he is a witness upon that, right? That you are a witness unto yourself. And it's talking about other verses to contextualize like man's ingratitude towards God and love for wealth, etc. But fundamentally, the verse is also saying that like you don't have to look far. Like you are proving yourself that this is who you are, right? And that's what I was saying. You got to know where you stand in relation to something. So if you know through your engagement of like Netflix or whatever else, that one episode can suddenly turn into 10 episodes. In the moment is going to be hard if you're immersed in it. But a day later, a week later, when you sit and you reflect, you could say, I still need this as an outlet, but it changes now from being an outlet to being a distraction, unless I can put like a limit on it. And so I say to myself, I'm going to just watch like 2 episodes of this show and then I cut it off. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? And sometimes like that's not what everybody needs, right? Yeah.
I have a thought about this. I think also part of being a student is that we kind of Supposed to do anything in our lives is that we're gonna study this. So it's like if you go to a halaqa, that's like an hour I could have spent studying. Or if you watch Netflix, that's an hour I could have spent studying. But I think you have to just like prioritize what it is that you need in your life and acknowledge that you're not supposed to be studying all the time, and you should have time to like have fun,
Yeah, definitely.
worship or whatever. And so like it's not always like, oh, I spent the 2 hours watching Netflix and that like I could have been doing work then, because it's fine, you know, you don't have to be doing work all the time.
You should not be doing work all the time, right? And that's what I'm saying. You recognize, what is this religion about? Just like you're not in prayer all the time, but you do what you got to do. Do you know what I mean? So metaphysically, even if you're here and you're reading something else, you're in a place where your spiritual self is in a room where prayer takes place, right? There's barakah in the room, right? These are gatherings that inshallah the angels are a part of. So you come and sit here and read a different book. I don't care, right? It's not gonna bother me, you know what I mean? But you want to make determinations for yourself. You see what I'm saying? And that's where you have to know you. And so if what you gain from is you're going to sit and you're going to read, the paradigm shift is an inward shift. And it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, obviously a part of reaching like your higher self is obviously through acts of kindness and generosity. But how do you find that in between where you're not harming yourself for others, but then also where like, you know what I'm saying? Because sometimes it's just like, I don't know.
You have to pay attention to yourself, right? And you pay attention to all of yourself. So you pay attention. Why do you get sick all the time? Why does your weight fluctuate? Why are you in a bad mood? Why are you in a happy mood? Why do you feel energized? Why do you feel good? Why do you have headaches? Why do you have whatever? These are not just end results that you deal with them and then move on. But you can sit and you can think deeply about it and to recognize. And where and how your body will show you signs of things. We went through the early part of COVID, and our community is very large, alhamdulillah. It's very like diverse, a lot going on. We had thousands of people get sick. We had tons of people pass away. I'm absorbing a lot of trauma from people. I don't know how many weeks into it, I start to feel like a lot of tension in my body. And then probably a couple of months into it, I herniate 2 discs in my neck. And it comes from like sedentary lifestyle and all of this kind of stuff. But it's also just taking in a lot of people's pain, right? My self-care is non-existent. I'm back at home now. Everything's shut down. I don't have a place to exercise like I normally would. I'm like snacking a lot more. I'm in all of these different kind of frames that are other than what my norm is, but I'm so into it, right? The same way that Alia just said, in that moment, even where you're doing good, it can create now an idea that you're not in a space where you can disrupt any of this. So I have to constantly be in a place where, I got to do this for someone else. I got to do this for someone else. I got to do this for someone else. And I stop paying attention to what my body, my heart, my mind is showing me. You're running on empty. You're running on fumes. And the consequence of that is that like this part of my neck was now swollen pretty much up to here when I was standing straight. I couldn't use my left hand for a long time. I had to relearn how to use it. And aside from the pain, which was very real, I just couldn't sleep for longer than 15, 20 minutes at a time because my body would just be in a constant state of pain. Now I could be like, hey, this is terrible, which it was. And it was crazy. Like one thing just led to the next, subhanAllah. Medications I was taking for pain created ulcers in my stomach, so I couldn't take the painkillers. And I then developed like random hives all over my body. At one point, I had like excessive hiccuping, right? A medicine that they gave me to deal with something, it had this like 0 point something percent that side effect that if you take it, you won't be able to stop hiccuping. And I just kept hiccuping. And then I'm living with my two bratty kids who kept laughing at me, and my wife who's mean and laughed at me too. And she'd be like, come look at Baba. He can't stop hiccuping. Well, this is great. But it's not because of just in the moment. The dynamic that's created necessitates me recognizing the role that I played within it. And if I chose in that moment to forego a prioritization of other parts to me, the same way your stomach is going to tell you when it's hungry and your throat's going to tell you when it's thirsty, your heart, your spirit, your mind is going to tell you when it's not doing so well. But also it's going to tell you when it is doing well. And ours isn't a tradition that tells us just don't do bad. It tells us also embrace what's good, right? So you know when you are balanced. You know what's going on when you feel a sense of wellness. And when you can understand the variables and factors that render now a sense of imbalance, you just got to decide, well, what do I do? I'm not going to turn my back on the community I serve. So for a year and a half in a pandemic, yeah, like it's going to be a little bit stressful. I can recognize there's an end to it, inshallah. But in that moment, my self-care routine is going to have to still be augmented and adapted. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? What do you think? Yeah.
So it makes sense.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up?